hopefully it's now doing its thing, so I'll be able to make that available afterwards for people who couldn't attend. So the purpose of this webinar is to look at a number of ways you can improve legal service delivery in larger full-service law firms. Cicero specialise in what we call knowledge management, but it's quite a large topic. We'll be covering it here in the next 45 minutes, looking at techniques that you can use and specifically 5 programs you can run to basically help you improve on some of the things that you will be doing already and just maybe giving you some tools to make that a more efficient process. So if you go to cicero.com, you can actually follow a lot of what we're doing by just going to the search button on the right-hand side of the top of the screen, and then you will see a number of articles in here. They have been specifically delivered in this order, so they're going to follow the same order that we're going to be talking about them in this webinar. They actually represent the 5 topics we're covering, which is looking at building proprietary knowledge databases, what they can do for you, what a knowledge database is, looking at how to keep the content fresh by using workflows, using that same technique in compliance. Compliance, obviously, for law firms is incredibly important. And we're looking at things like client and matter inception and other processes and how that can actually tie in using the same techniques that we've used for our knowledge workflows. And then we'll be looking at further automation, doing things like automating document templates, and then tying that all together to look at how law firms can efficiently deliver high volume, traditionally low value, fixed price legal transactions. So those are the topics that we're going to cover. If my voice holds up, I don't quite know why it's playing up today, it never has done before. So we're going to, first of all, look at knowledge databases. Now, knowledge databases differ from a normal database in the fact they offer a little bit more. So a normal database would hold typically data. What we are concerned about is large data in terms of the content. So we're looking at formatted content, we're looking at contextual metadata, and we're looking at process knowledge. So not just looking at pure data, but actually how you can do a specific process. And that's why we call it a knowledge database, because the knowledge can come in both a written and in the process form. So you can use these things for basically anything within a professional services firm to hold very specific kinds of information. So what we're looking at here on the screen right now is also a knowledge database. It's an example, obviously, of the kind of data that we want to project as a software firm to our customers. And so we are doing things like allowing our customers to go and find all of our manuals. And you can go here and you can just click and download any of our manuals. We're also holding on here information on the articles that we've got. We have case studies, so if you want to go and find out some case studies, you can go and read about other firms doing similar things to yourselves. But we can also store things like links. So on here, if you click on the demo resource type, you'll see there are a number of processes, and if you click on each of these processes, you can then actually fire off a live demo, for instance here, of how to automate or how an automated share purchase agreement might look. So the way that I've segmented this particular database is by things that are relevant to what we are trying to get across to our audiences, different types of resources. It's important to know when they're published. And here's the different audiences. So if you clicked on the webinar audience, for example, you would see just a list of things that we're looking at today. So this is an example of a knowledge database. There are lots of different kinds of knowledge databases, and we're going to look at a few others. So let's first of all look at a more traditional database that you'd expect to see in a law firm, which is a know-how database. So in here, we would expect to see document templates. We would expect to see possibly clauses, research material, Bibles, external and internal material, and you might have some very topical things, so such as the kind of risks that the Brexit produces, and notes on that, which you're trying to be honest, as a full-service law firm, is the kind of thing that you should be going out and telling your clients about, and using that to help motivate them to do billable work with yourselves. So these are obviously mostly going to be documents or web articles, but they could also be links to other websites. They could be checklists. They could be any number of different documented or links to documented content. But the main thing about this kind of content is it's going to be broken down by contextual metadata. So one of the main ways that we organize things in a law firm is by practices. So you've got certain metadata that goes across practices. So what kind of document it is, who the author is, and we'll look at status in a minute. But for instance, if I was to select data protection, I'm then going to get up some categories that are relative to data protection. If I change that and set that to say corporate, I will get classifications that are relevant to corporate. So you can design your own metadata structures in a knowledge database that relates to the knowledge you're putting in there. So one of the exercises that a firm needs to do is to work out how it's going to create, or what kind of metadata it's going to use, which is obviously going to help you contextually go and find the information in the database. So the idea of the database is they are sort of self-guiding. They are providing advice much in the same way that a law firm would look to provide advice to its clients. So the way you create these taxonomical, we call them facets internally, because it's faceted data. So the way you create that, you create it all within the software. We have a number of tools, for instance, that can help you do that. So one of the tools we have is a taxonomy manager, for instance, that would help you just go in here and right-click, and you can create and build your own taxonomy. Obviously, until you put something into the system, it's not going to provide you with any data back, so you've got to actually load it up with documents and data. But one of the exercises we can do is, many law firms have knowledge all over the place, is to go around and try to get that knowledge and bring it into the centralized systems. And we're going to use a number of techniques to convince people to do that, which I'm going to talk about a bit later on. So this obviously would be the centralized knowledge library. It can be built any way that suits your firm, and it's a unique collection of the firm's know-how. So we have dozens of these all around Europe, and every one of them is unique because the content is unique, because the type of law they're doing, the practices that are put together are unique. But what a lot of firms want to do is they want to create practice pages. So quite often you might provide a specific page just for a practice to go in and see things at their level, but then allow them to view other people's data if they so want to. Something else that you might want to do within here is you might want to create your own version of this particular, or of a number of knowledge databases. So what you can do is you can actually go and select various items that are of interest to you, and you can create your own list. So we're going to create our own mini database, and we'll call this the webinar list, for instance. And I will save that. Now, there's no point creating these things unless you're going to share them, because law firms always work with practices, and practices ideally will work with each other, or perhaps even cross-practice. So I can go into my list of lists. So here's a list I just created. And I can start to work with that list. I can actually say, I'm not happy about the way I've done this. I'm just going to reorganize the list. I'm going to put some help text on here. So this is interesting. And then I'm going to share this with people inside of our firm. So I can actually share it with groups. So I could share this with all my friends in finance, and also with Andrew. And then they will be able to see the list just by going into their version of the software in this case, and going up and having a look at the lists, and they will get it assigned to them. This can also appear inside of your Office products as well. So if you've created a list of Word documents, we have a Word add-in that allows you to go into Word, and then you can see your lists that either you created or been created for you. So if I go to lists here, you'll see webinar list, and here's the list that I just created. And I can select one of these and actually create a document directly from within inside of Microsoft Word. So basically, we have a knowledge, what we call a knowledge database, and we're using it to store general knowledge. But we can also create specific ones. So, for instance, what a lot of firms want is some kind of a know-who database. So a know-who database is similar to a know-how database, but obviously it's all about people. So in this case, we might be interested in finding a solicitor working inside of our firm who is based in Gloucestershire, and then we can see a list of people who are available. We could click into one of these and have a look at this guy, get some details on him, and obviously store as much information as you need within the system. And again, it's a knowledge database, so the system is designed to allow you to create whatever metadata you want. So you can build your own data structures, and again, we can work with you to do that. One of the things that this system does as well is it allows you to automate templates using that data. So for instance, if we were holding information on people inside the firm, what we might want to do is to be able to get their resumes, their CVs, and download them. This particular demo I'll show you it in a bit more detail later on, but allows you to get hold of employment contracts, but it's basically the same kind of thing. So these are generated from the data contained within the form itself. So I'm actually creating fully formatted documents using the data that is contained in the system, and we'll have a look at that in a bit more detail. But as a law firm, you're going to be using a lot of standard documentation. The only difference between that documentation are the choices you make and the data you put in it. So the ability to create documents and emails directly from the data itself, obviously, is something that can be very, very useful to a law firm, and we'll build on that shortly as well. So two kinds of databases we've looked at, the know-how and the know-who. There are other kinds of databases as well that lawyers can take advantage of, and one of which, for instance, is a project management database. So within a firm, you might have a number of clients, and you might want to offer some kind of portals to these clients. And I see this quite a lot in firms these days. They create these portals, but they tend to be quite static. They tend to be all about documents. They're not about work per se. They're just kind of publishing documents, and they're a bit dry. So we've been working to try to create some more interesting ones, particularly around the concept of the kind of work that you can get from, say Brexit, and any kind of sort of legal work, really. I'm going to put mute on here. So I was putting some mutes on there because we're getting some stuff coming through. But this allows you to actually store, in this case, the content is actually, they're actually tasks. So these are actually bits of billable work that we're doing for a client, and the way these tasks get put in there's a number of ways we can do it. But basically here, we're talking about actual information about a task. So it has start date, it has number of days to complete the task, it has status, and the kind of things that you want to track in terms of your project management. So you might want to do things like, for instance, view this as a Gantt chart, where you actually want to be able to see each task as it's coming up, and actually you could work with your client on this in a much more dynamic way. So your client can come in and see the kind of work that they're doing, and they can run various reports. They can view calendars to see when people are available, and you can sort of publish this kind of information directly for your clients. So that's another kind of knowledge database. That's a much more dynamic one. The final kind of one we're going to look at is one that is all about a specific type of transaction. So I'm actually going to use plot cells here. This is one I did recently for a client. So this is a knowledge database based around a very specific thing where we're going to be helping developers sell their properties, which obviously is going to be creating a lot of fantastic work for us. But again, it's going to be a high volume and possibly low value kind of set of transactions. But hopefully we're doing hundreds of these. So we need to be doing them efficiently. We need to be doing them. We need to be managing them, and ideally, possibly even providing clients with ways of self-serving, so they could go into the portal and quickly see, for instance, all properties that are sold, which is kind of useful information if that's what you need. And using this, we'll see a bit later on in the demonstration how we can automate a process that involves quite a lot of different parties involved with that, working together to sell these plots. So that's a matter-specific database. So we've seen quite a few different kinds of databases, and the idea is that you can, as a knowledge manager, speak to your practice heads and say, how can we help you create these databases? Now, one of the things that is very specific to our know-how database is you need to make sure this content doesn't actually go off. So it needs to be managed, it needs to be maintained, and it needs to be reviewed periodically. I see quite a lot of knowledge databases that is not done to, and what tends to happen is that they start and everyone's very excited, and then after a couple of years, people stop using it because the content has kind of become old. So we really don't want that to happen. So the way of getting around that is by having some kind of workflow system, and by making sure that the content going in is of high quality when it goes in, and also is kept at that level of high quality. So we'll put a document into the system, and I can do this from Word as well, but I'll do this from the web interface. It's easier for me, and I'm just going to pick a Domino's invoice, because that's what I've got sitting there, and we'll just upload that into the system. So I'm going to be adding quite a bit of metadata to this, but I'm going to be doing it in sections. So I know who the author is, so I don't have to be the person uploading it. I might know jurisdiction. I might want to add in some basic info in here, and then I'm going to send that off for approval. So that's what we call a gatekeeper workflow. So what happens is that's going to go to somebody depending upon the information that I put on that form, and we can then define who the gatekeeper is going to be for instance, for documents for a particular jurisdiction, or documents going to a particular practice area, or whatever rules that you actually want to put together. So as the gatekeeper, I would actually get a notification. I'd also send a notification to the guy sending it in, saying thanks for your submission. We'll be looking into that. We'll come back to you. I'm just going to show you what that looks like from the point of view of the workflow itself. So this is the workflow designer. So what we saw there was submitting know-how. We saw that coming in. That noise is my email coming in saying you've got new know-how. That's going to be routed to the gatekeeper, and it's going to be dependent upon whatever rules you want within your own organization. When it gets routed to the gatekeeper, he has a number of choices. He can either go, yep, I like it, and I'm going to set the document to published and notify the originator, or I'm not so keen, I'm going to send it for rework. And if he sends it for rework, he can send it back to the author with a note saying, well, we've got one of these, and thanks very much, but could you use this other one? In which case he would then reject it. Or he could say, actually, could you just make some changes, and then we'll send it back to the gatekeeper, who will then go through the process again and hopefully set it off to be published. So that's a way of maintaining data as it goes into the system. So we're going to make sure as it goes into the system that it is going to be put into the company style. It's going to make sure that we're not putting up lots of the same kinds of documents. That's why the gatekeeper's there. And one of the things that we're going to need to know is at what stage things are within the workflow. So we're going to need some kind of workflow reporting, where I can see how many documents are at what stage, and I can go in and have a look at it. And there are also going to be emails flying around as well, reminding me to get on and approve things as is required. Now, one of the things that we're going to have in our profile, and this is pretty much all profiles, although I had an interesting discussion a couple of days ago with somebody about this, but one of the things that we tend to put into all of our profiles is something called a review date. So if we just go ahead and have a look at this particular profile here, you'll see here we have when the document was last reviewed and when the document will next be reviewed. Now, these review dates are the most important thing about our knowledge database, because they're going to define that this content is up to date. We don't want things in this database that are not current. The whole point of this database is that it's one source of the truth, and when you go to it, you know everything in here is current. So what happens on this review date is really important. So we have a couple of options. We can send notifications off to various people. For instance, we tend to have this concept of owners and authors. So we'll have an owner, and we'll also have an author. Now, the author typically is going to be the person that wrote it, and the owner is going to be somebody in the knowledge team who's responsible for making sure that the whole database is kept up to date, or certainly they're part of it. So those two people can be involved in the conversation, and hopefully this thing will then get renewed, and we'll send out some emails to people to tell them to do that. The other way of doing that, obviously, again, is by using this reports, and you can run a number of reports. So, for instance, here's a report of overdue documents by author, and Amy's definitely needs to make sure that she gets on top of what she's doing, although she does have most of the documents, to be fair. And that's not atypical. That's fairly standard in one of our knowledge databases. So you can use reports and workflow to make sure that these workflows are actually run. And then one of the questions that you have to ask yourself is, what happens if a document is overdue? And we have a number of options there, one of which is we can color coordinate it. So we have these status flags. So you can have, for instance, I've got new items published and under review. So if a document has gone past its sell-by date, it can be marked as under review, which gives you a nice visual metaphor of, you know, you can use this, but it's not necessarily as good as something that has been published. And you can have as many stages of this as you like. The other option is a bit more draconian, and that is that we actually remove it from the search results. Now, we don't delete it typically, but what we do is we'll archive it so that people won't find it in the search. But if they've got it in a list, for instance, it will stay in the list. But that's a nice way of making sure that you keep these knowledge databases nice and clean. If you do that, then the success of your project will last a lot longer than just the initial enthusiasm, and more practices will see the benefit of this. And the whole idea is to increase the quality of the master database, and reduce the risk to the firm of something going out that is basically incorrect, and also to the individual sphere. So if we've got these workflow tools, we can take it to the next stage. And the third kind of program we've got is the program of looking at compliance. And in compliance, we're going to be really concerned about how we onboard clients, particularly these days. So we have to make sure that we are onboarding clients in the right way, that we're collecting the right information. So these forms will start to look a bit more familiar to you now. So this is one in red. And we're going to collect information, for instance, on the team that's going to be practicing whatever the matter is. We're going to be collecting information on the profile of the work. So if you're handling real estate, then automatically it would be a high risk kind of matter, and you'd want to be doing more due diligence on your anti-money laundering. Similarly, if you're going to pick a higher risk country, then again, you're just making sure that it's a higher risk as well, and you're going to want to do more checks. So your workflow is going to have to say, if certain categories have been set to high risk, we're going to be asking more questions and ask you to provide more information. We're also going to want to be able to do an internal conflicts check, and that's we're going to need to type in the client name and go and search external databases. If we find someone that's relevant, then we know it's possibly an existing client, and we can write some software that goes and picks up the client number from your practice management system. And again, that can affect your decisions later on in terms of how much risk assessment you're going to be asking. Another big thing we have to do in terms of clients and matter is we have to get information from the beneficial owners. So the beneficial owners themselves kind of come in two main flavors. They come as individuals or businesses, and depending on whether they're an individual or they're a business, you're going to have to get different information from them. And this information obviously is really vital because this is the information that you could possibly be in trouble with the SRA if you don't collect this kind of information correctly. So you need to make sure that you're providing the right kind of information. And then you're going to need to tie those two things together. So you've got your internal CMI process, your external KYC process, and of course you can have many beneficial owners for each transaction, so you're going to have to tie those together at some stage and handle that kind of stuff as well. So the other things about compliance you have to consider, as well as the risk assessments. Hopefully this is going to go on and give you a new client account details within your practice management system, and maybe even link into an engagement letter. Because you're collecting all this compliance information at this stage, why not use that to go and help create a engagement letter that defines the transaction and defines the kind of risk, and also put in things like your terms of business and your rates and everything as well. A lot of firms don't take that seriously enough, and the big problem with that is you're exposing yourself to to risk right before you've even started the transaction. So this process is becoming more and more important. What it can do is you can lead nicely from compliance into knowledge, because you're collecting a lot of information as part of this process. So you kind of know what the transaction is when you're starting. So why not use that to go to your knowledge database and grab the relevant bits of templates and documents and external information and provide that to your fee earner, so he's got something to get him started with. One of the things that we're going to need to do as part of the process is we're going to need to have an audit history, because at some stage we're going to have to prove what happened. So we're going to need to be able to record everything that happened, who viewed what, who changed what, who answered yes to what, on what date, at what time. So that is something that's not editable. It's a permanent part of the record, and you're going to need to be able to provide that information to the SRA when they come banging on your door and saying, we just put this guy in jail, why did you accept the transaction? Well, you can say, well, at the time, this is the information that we have, and you need to be able to prove that. So we have our knowledge databases, we have our knowledge workflows. We're going to use those, extend those, and hopefully use them in the compliance area as well. One of the things that we looked at briefly was document automation. So we just take that to look at that in a bit more depth. Not going to go on too much about document automation at this point, because it's such a big topic on its own, but it's interesting to look at from the point of view of how it works with a knowledge database. So I am using the same sort of techniques that I'm using before. So I'm going to fill some information in this case about myself. So as I'm sort of typing this in, obviously you're seeing it appear within our template framework here. And I can go and type in some various information. It's going to decide how this transaction is going to progress. So I'm just going to move on here and enter in some more detail. We've got some default information we've put in here, which just saves me from typing it in every time I do a demo. So I'm just going to select practice and a charge out rate. And then we're just going to go on to have a look at some various options. Now, one of the things that is a feature of document automation is the process of automation can take quite a lot of time. So creating these automated templates is not something you can do in 5 minutes. It can take hours, days. Big ones can take weeks to do. If you take something like a share purchase agreement, that could take months. You're talking about 300 or 400 page potential agreement. So there are levels of automation. So one of the things that you can do, for instance, is if you have a look at this on the right-hand side here, you'll see that the first clause on here is all about who your employer is. Now, if I pick the option for a Swedish derogation clause, that will completely change the whole structure of this document, because the document has been designed to be a single template for use in multiple environments. Also, if I go down here to, say, section 12, clause 12 here, you'll see is all about sickness and absence. If I actually offered a standard company car, then clause 12 becomes about standard company car, and clause 13 is pushed down, becomes a sickness and absence clause. So I can automate the clause substitution, which is actually a much simpler process than putting in all the field information. But if you also put in the field information, then obviously what you can get is a completely automated document, which will be downloaded effectively as a Word document for you to go in there and then do your own customization of the document before you send it out. Another thing that we offer on our knowledge databases is something called a drafting note, which allows me to have information on how to fill in the document next to the document itself, which is just kind of a useful thing to do. These are quite popular. A lot of law firms do it, but they tend to put them at the top of the document, which isn't very helpful when you're sitting down here at page 25 and you actually need to have some information on how to fill that bit in. So quite often the drafting notes can be longer than the documents themselves. And so you're basically using the automation in different degrees depending on the kind of document, but in terms of the high volume transactions, things like employment contracts, it's a terrific way of combining data with documents to create what is a fairly standard document. But of course, you can then go in as a Word document and enter in your own information as well. So you're not linked to you're not stuck with that template, and then you can save that into your document management system, which is kind of neat. Now, one of the things about this is that you go into a lot of firms and you might go to what they call a knowledge database and see someone's asked to go and find a deed of covenant, and you go and search for a deed of covenant, you find 10 things called a deed of covenant. Which one do I use? Well, if you have got good metadata, then obviously that'll give them some information on which deed of covenant they should be using for which type of work, but you're still managing 10 deeds of covenant. If they're all kind of similar apart from a few major clauses, then just this clause substitution thing means you can manage one template rather than 10, which, as well as reducing risk, obviously reduces the maintenance that you're doing on those as well, so it can actually save time and money. So the balance on automation is to make sure that you automate the right kind of documents and you have the right skills in-house, and you can do it in a step-by-step process. But just simple things like providing drafting notes can obviously help a great deal. And also, don't forget, we have these lists that we can use as well, which, again, is quite an easy way of kind of document automation light, if you like. So that's another use for a knowledge database. Before we go, we're just going to cover the final thing, which I'm going to look at, which is kind of wrapping the whole thing together, and looking at how we can use these techniques to make certain types of law a bit more profitable. So a lot of law firms these days are having to do transactional law, they're having to do it for a fixed price, so they are doing low value, high volume work, and then trying to make that work for them. So I'm just going to go back to that plot sales demo that we saw before. So this is our plot sales data room, which you remember was for a specific type of matter. And what I'm going to do here is I am going to prepare a new plot for sale. So we'll call this plot 1000, 4 bedrooms, house, and it's going to be £500,000. We can also prepare some information about the solicitor. So solicitor, for instance, that would be our solicitor, that would be our side, if you like. And we're going to save that information. So we've now made that available for sale. And if we go back and have a look, we can see it is marked as available for sale. So plot 1000 is ready to go. What I'm now going to do is hand it over to our sales team. Now, the sales team obviously could be working for the law firm, could be working for the developer, could be a third-party estate agent, but they're going to go in here and they're going to actually make the sale. When they make the sale, we're going to mark the property as under offer, and they're going to want to enter in details about the purchasers. So we can go and create a new purchaser, and of course you could actually have quite a few purchasers working on here. So in this case we'll just have one, we'll call him Bill. He's going to be an individual, and we'll just give him some address information and select his conveyancer. So we've already got the internal solicitors, we've got the conveyancers, we've got the clients themselves, the people who are actually buying this thing. All these people are part of this transaction. So having a system that allows us to manage this is very, very helpful. If we just continue on to the end, so let's just imagine everything's gone through, it's fine, we're going to confirm the sale. The final thing we're going to do is download all of that documentation. So we can go back to here as the final solicitor, find all the sold documents in here, and then go and download all the information that we need, deduction of titles, completion statements, agreement of lease, etc., etc., etc. So these would all be filled in with all the data that's contained in here, in all our various different fields, and we can create these for specific transaction types. And we can typically do these within a few days. So they're not, we're not talking about sitting there and spending 10 months developing a process, which is what a lot of traditional software development is about. We're talking about people who understand the business going in and meeting up with the practice heads and saying, just give us some information and we will design this for you. And we can do it in a very iterative fashion, prototyping it as we go along. So that's the end of the presentation, end of the webinar. The next steps, if you're interested in any of this stuff, is to go to our website, get in touch with us. We've got our contact you forms on the website. If you're going to have a look at the contact you form, you'll see it's a very familiar looking form. It's actually, surprise, surprise, a knowledge database with a workflow attached. And we can help you do things like identify your sources of know-how, help you design the metadata structures that you want, obviously import all your data into a single system because people hopefully already have some stuff together, and then we'll design the workflow process after that. So we'll be worried about stuff coming in and how we're going to archive the stuff that we've collected from other places as it becomes older. That involves working with the practice heads, working with the KN team as well, to design your knowledge systems. We can also help you design your CMI processes and your KYC processes. We have a service for document automation, and we can help you design these matter portals as well. So it's basically a number of business change programs we're talking about here. We have software that we think can help you, but the lessons are the same. Design your databases, design your workflows, and then see what you can automate. And then ideally put that all on a website so it's available for internal users and for clients as well. And you're going to be helping to improve the way and come up with terrific ways of maintaining your current clients and winning new ones by showing them all these great tools that you're offering them and great ways of getting at their own data. So thanks for your time, and please feel free to get in touch. Thank you and goodbye.